Okay, so to introduce our next panel talk, I'm pleased to just hand over to somebody who really knows his stuff when it comes to the future of electric charging, especially in urban areas. So without saying anything further, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Lex Hartman from Ubitricity. Hello.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I need something from a friend of mine. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's a long time ago that someone said to me, I know my stuff, but it's very good to hear, of course. We're going to spend an hour together on charging in urban areas. And I want to do that actually with, I would almost say, three friends. A couple of words as an introduction. The EVs, as we now hear, a couple of days here, or at least 1.5 days, are actually there. Look around the corner. And if not here in Germany, then look in Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the first 3 best sold cars are electrical cars. And we've seen in Europe that the first cities are there that are making plans that within a limited number of years, I'm talking about 8, my communication manager is indicating something to me. Sorry? Ah, okay, thank you. You can say that aloud, no problem. These countries and cities are indicating that within a limited number of years, actually, there will be not 10 or 20 or 30% of electric cars, but I'm talking about 100%, either electrical or hydrogen. And that means this is a tremendous future with a tremendous challenge. There are many, many angles. It's an area which is not as much as developed as fast charging along highways. And that's the topic I would like to discuss today. And I very much love talking, but today I try to get that to a minimum because I've got 3 very good guests who from a different angle will talk about that. First of all, Knut von Knobelsdorff. He is the director and sprecher of NOW, and he will give some light on the perspective from, let's say, government or the party that, hi, Knut, take a seat, what, let's say, the government and his organization could do to help infrastructure into cities, which is a totally new area, so we're actually finding that. I've got Fabian Ziegler from Shell. He's the CEO of Shell Germany, a terrific guy who leads Shell into a new future. He agrees, and a modest one as well. And he leads Shell into our new future in a tremendous way. And I'm also very proud to introduce René Kerkmeester. We go a long way. We work together at a grid operator, and many, many years ago we started about thinking of crowd balancing, using all the batteries, all the people into the future, and we talk a lot about that. And the interesting part is René already does it today, integrated. So we've got 3 angles here to talk about this topic. Unfortunately, there are more than 10 angles, so we only cover a part. Our guest will give an introduction, a short speech, and then give the view. We will have a discussion amongst ourselves as friends. We're looking for the future, and we hope that you involve yourself quite soon in this discussion, and that we can answer your questions. Good.
Should I start?
If you could start, that would be wonderful.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, from the NOW's perspective, little statement. German government's overall strategy for charging infrastructure in Germany includes various public and private use cases. At home and at work, on the streets, in customer car parks and at fast charging parks, when out and about, charging is to be made as easy and convenient as possible. All of these use cases are addressed by funding programs and other measures. And in my opinion, in our opinion, one of the most important measures in recent years was the establishment of the National Center for Charging Infrastructure, in German, the Nationale Leitstelle Ladeinfrastruktur. I will refer to simply as Leitstelle from here on. Leitstelle orients itself on the federal government's master plan for charging infrastructure, which was adopted in the end of 2019. The term municipalities appears 10 times on the 15-page master plan, which is roughly the same number of times as the term automotive industry is mentioned. This shows the importance of cities and municipalities in this task. They know, the municipalities, the actual local situation best, and my colleagues in the Leitstelle are well aware of this. They have developed or are developing various digital tools for demand planning, site matching, and very important knowledge transfer in order to support this commitment at the local level and to harness it for ensuring that the charging infrastructure covers the required areas and needs. In addition, various funding programs have been established for public and private charging infrastructure. In my view, there are two major questions to be answered in the area of charging infrastructure in cities and municipalities. First, where in densely populated residential areas with only a limited number of private parking spaces can we create a charging infrastructure that is suitable for daily use by everyone? And second, how can we ensure an adequate expansion of the electricity supply grids? There is no simple and conclusive solution to either question. However, I would like to outline a few possible approaches that the Leitstelle is exploring. Two core issues are involved. First, the competition for space in neighborhoods and how to resolve it. And second, charging performance. How does fast and normal charging interplay in neighborhoods? The fundamental question concerning the competition for space is, where is the publicly accessible charging network located? Where can one simply charge without being additionally required to buy something else? On the one hand, it is possible to use existing larger parking spaces where people park for shorter periods of time for charging. Examples are public amenities such as entertainment, exhibition venues, sports facilities, as well as customer car parks, especially those at supermarkets and retail outlets. Those wanting to charge large amounts in these spaces during the rather short parking period of a maximum of approximately 2 hours would need higher DC charging power in the range of at least 50 kilowatts to achieve significant recharging of the battery. In such cases, however, it would also mean that a single weekly session would be sufficient for many people to receive the charge they need for their weekly driving range. If one were to opt for lower charging performance, more charging procedures would be needed to cover the weekly driving range, and more charging points would therefore also be needed. Alternatively, longer charging periods, such as overnight, would be required. An example of this strategy is the approach of integrating low power charging points into a large number of street lamps, as eMobility is doing it or is planning to do it. And by the way, which is extremely important when it comes to integrating eMobility into the system, into the energy system. I'm pretty convinced that Mr. Hartmann is going to direct the discussion into this direction afterwards. But one thing is clear in all cases. Municipalities need to provide more public space for charging infrastructure as they do right now. The question of network expansion and performance also plays a role. Is the necessary grid capacity available on site? Can fast charging solutions of 50 kilowatts and more be realized in larger numbers at a reasonable cost? One must be aware here that the grid connection is a frequent cause of delays in projects to set up charging infrastructure in Germany, and I think elsewhere too. And among the reasons for this is a lack of legal requirements regarding supply timeframes. While a maximum period of 2 months is defined for low voltage connection, in which the grid operator is required to communicate its approval or rejection of a charging project, there is no corresponding regulation in the medium voltage range. And of course, the medium voltage range is the one which is necessary for fast charging infrastructure. The processing time for grid connection also varies greatly due to the large number of grid operators in Germany. In the event of approval, no time frame is then specified with regard to when the connection is to be made. So a reform of the Energy Industry Act, the Energiewirtschaftsgesetz in German, could provide a solution here, or should provide a solution. An obligation on the part of the grid operators to state the approximate duration of the connection procedure could also improve the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no final plan yet how to solve the problem of municipal charging for each and every setting. The solution for the respective neighborhood depends strongly on the local circumstances. Besides a suitable property, a sufficient or quickly expandable grid connection is also decisive. Taking the grid situation and the grid operator in a neighborhood into account at an early stage and to a greater extent during planning can be worthwhile, so that major and time-consuming electricity connection installations are not necessary. We are still evaluating and learning from different examples around the world, and the next step certainly should be or would be pilot projects in cities and or districts on a grand scale to draw further conclusions. I know that what you're doing, Lex, in London comes close to this. The Leitstelle will further intensify this process in the months to come. Either way, flexibility and creativity are needed to find the right solution for the respective neighborhood. Very important, skilled experts in the municipal administrations are absolutely essential for this. As already mentioned, the Leitstelle is actively working on providing the needed know-how. But the crucial first step has to be taken by the municipalities themselves. They have to provide the human resources for the task. The task needs caretakers on the local level, and this is absolutely decisive. So in the current period of transition, it will be necessary to explore a couple of new approaches. NOW and the Leitstelle have the ambition to help paving the way. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Kurt. Thank you very much, Kurt. Just a remark in between before we go on with Fabian. I learned from a journalist that as a moderator you write down a couple of sentences what you pick up. And one of the things I wrote down is there's no plan yet. That's in this case I think very good news, because that means that we can influence a lot, that we together can think about how fast is this coming. How much do we need? How it's going to be financed, and etc. So normally I would say not very German to not have a plan, but in this case, that would be maybe a good thing.
I would readdress it as there is no plan yet for the really difficult question of municipalities and cities or dense neighborhoods. Well, of course, there is a plan for the charging infrastructure overall.
It's even better that I asked the question. Thank you. We will pick it up later. Fabian.
Yeah, Lex, thank you so much for having me. Quite delighted to be here. In fact, I think it's an honor for Shell to be here. And let me approach this topic from a slightly different angle. And let me start by zooming out a bit and talk about what Shell is going to be. And important for me to say, Shell is not an oil company, which you think it is. We're in the middle of a radical transformation, in particular in this market here in Germany. And if you look at Shell, we have large market shares in fossil parts of energy. And if you look at Germany, 800 million tons of CO2, 10% of this CO2 is put in circulation by Shell. That's perhaps the bad news, and that's perhaps where you will say Shell is 10% of the problem. The good news is we have a radical plan to transform this company. We have great capabilities, and we have access to customers. We have 6 million B2C private customers that regularly come to Shell. And we do roughly business with every second large industrial company in Germany. And this transformation is about these customers. We want to position ourselves as a decarbonization partner, and we committed to at least a 30% CO2 reduction by end of the decade. And the way to bring this transformation onto the street is to transform all our value chains. And I will come to electricity, but I need to start in the fossil world. We own and operate Germany's biggest refinery, which processes a lot of crude oil. And we turn this refinery into what we call an energy and chemicals park, which means we reconfigure all the plants away from fossil products into bio, into hydrogen, and of course, we will require a huge amount of green electricity. So we completely transform this part of our value chain system. People know us probably for quite high ambition in hydrogen. We have in Germany a really clear ambition to be number one in hydrogen. We work it customer back. We invest in infrastructure to distribute hydrogen. We want to produce it locally in quite a few different projects. And we are working to become a major power company in country. We work our socks off to get access to local power generation, whether it's offshore wind, whether it's onshore wind, solar. We acquired quite a few power-related companies. People might have heard of Next Kraftwerke, a virtual renewable power trading company. We have the privilege to work with Lex around ubitricity. We acquired Sonnen. So we have quite a plan to become a power company. And we also work quite strongly the field of bio. And with this, I'm also saying we need many, many avenues to really master the challenge of energy transition. And let me also say this will transform this company totally. You will not recognize this company. We will be highly collaborative, tons of partnerships, and we really try to be a much more empathetic company. So hopefully you all will see this different shell. Let me talk about mobility, which is a large part of our business, and it's a large part of Germany's decarbonization problem. 800 million tons of CO2, round about 180 million is transportation, around about 100 million is private transportation. And in our belief, the main route for the B2B part to decarbonize transportation will be hydrogen, ultimately. There will be electricity. There will be a need for bio solutions. For the private part, it's very evident. The main road will be electricity. We are quite convinced of that. And we also believe there will be typical patterns how consumers behave. We assume that round about 80% of the charging will happen either at home or at work. And we probably believe that only 20% will happen when en route. That's a kind of base belief. Now, we are strong in mobility as we speak, and we have a strong ambition to be the best mobility provider. We want to be number one in electric charging, and of course, we want to sort of drive this transformation in a very active way. And we do this under the brand of Shell Recharge, where we provide a quite holistic offer to our customers. And I give you a bit of a feel for the main components. We will, of course, electrify our current network of gas stations as you know them. We will have fast charging facilities there, and we will, of course, also invest in a more modern shop offer. That's one component. Under the Shell Recharge brand, we will have arrangements with destination charging partners, be it supermarkets, be it fast food chains. There's quite a few of these in the making. People know probably New Motion, which is our leg into the at-work and at-home world. Equally, we have Sonnen. And then, of course, ubitricity is kind of a key component, how we bring it to the more sort of city-based population. And all this offer, we want to integrate into one app. That's again the Shell Recharge brand, which is currently Europe's biggest proposition, and it's often winning awards. Huh? Now, the relevance of ubitricity in this particular piece is eminently high. It's a key element, obviously, for the city-based customer. So it's a key element for our end consumer. But I think it's also a very neat value proposition for city partnerships. And one of the ways how Shell wants to bring this energy transition to life is to collaborate quite deeply with different cities. And hopefully we can talk about this in a moment. Huh? So please take away that Shell is going to transform completely. Huge commitment to decarbonization, to defossilization, and we want to really be the number one in electric mobility, in particular for this wonderful country. So that's a few initial thoughts, Lex, that hopefully make sense.
Yeah, thank you, Fabian. Well, they do to me. It's I can only, as an in-between conclusion, tell you all. I didn't tell you that Shell bought ubitricity, but actually you said so, and that is the case. And it is surprising, I must say, how this sense of urgency that we need to change the company is there, from up there to down there, and that we are moving in that direction. And one of them is Shell addressing the cities through ubitricity, and we're working very hard on this. Well, before we get into that, how much? And so we come to René. Another point in this whole discussion, it's more the system approach, I would say. Where does eMobility fit? Why is it important for you? Why is it important for a grid operator? And this will maybe for some of you very surprising what René is already doing there. Yeah, René, take the floor.
Thank you, Lex, and good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to emphasize the electric system perspective on this. Today, per annum, some 8 billion euros per year is being spent on balancing the grid. On the redispatch, the congestion management in Germany, it's 2 billion on an annual basis. And these costs are rising rapidly because the system in the past was very predictable, not so volatile. But if we start to use more and more renewable sources such as wind and solar, there's much more flexibility needed. Today, the grid companies acquire this flexibility from the big power plants, the fossil stations. Of course, we want to decarbonize the energy system. And the only way to do that is to tap into the distributed flexibility services from electric vehicles, home batteries, all these smaller plants. The technical solutions that are available today and being used by the TSOs, the transmission system operators, or the DNOs, they are not fit for purpose. So we created a vision for TenneT in Germany and the Netherlands in 2018, which we called crowd balancing. Balancing with the crowd with all these distributed resources. We put first implementations in place in Germany with Zonne, with Van der Bron and Tesla cars in the Netherlands. And we found a blockchain-enabled solution that helped us not only to unlock this flex, but also to validate, to be able to prove that the service actually delivered. And this validation is key, because if you use 40 big power plants, you can put an expensive meter in there. It's easy to pre-qualify these people. But if you have millions of devices that have to participate in the energy landscape, you need different technical solutions. And we've proved that the blockchain could do that. We talked to a lot of industry, big car manufacturers, US companies, French, German companies, and they were all fed up with the very little pilots that the various DSOs were doing across Europe. The DSOs, the regional grid companies, they proved already that the electricity system could be benefited by this integration of cars. But what was lacking, a standard. So what we did is reaching out to other leading European TSOs And December 1st last year, we established a company called Equigy. Equigy is now owned by the Italian TSO, Terna, Swissgrid from Switzerland, APG from Austria, and TenneT in the Netherlands and Germany. 5 markets, so we're well on our way to set a standard, and there's other parties that are now countries that also are interested in participating. It's not for profit. The Equigy crowd balancing platform is an enabler for this change. So the existing energy markets, these billions of euros that I mentioned earlier, they can be accessed through aggregation. Equigy is not the aggregator. But companies like Zonne, could be Ubitricity, could be, you see many new type of aggregators starting to rise. They can tap on these balancing markets using the Equigy platform. We run multiple projects with leading companies. If you check our websites, Viessmann, BMW, in all the markets that we now operate. So it's rapidly growing. A key, and that brings me a little bit to the city challenges, because the TSOs, they take this from a national perspective. The TSOs and the DSOs have often been discussing, for the last decades, on how they can solve this together. My statement here is the technical solution and the standard is there. We have it. It's called Equigy. So all that's now needed is a political willingness for the DSOs, the DNOs, to work with the TSOs to set this standard all over the countries. And I'm happy that we could already announce in Switzerland with the city of Zurich, the DSO there, a nice project, which we will hopefully complete by the end of Q1 next year. And that will be a flagship, because then we have proven that we can not only use the distributed flexibility from a national perspective, but also in the last piece of the grid with the DSOs. So I think standardization is what we need. We need to unlock this distributed flexibility, which is a huge opportunity for all of us. Consumers will be prosumers, and that's, I think, the only way to further decarbonize the electricity balancing system in the next decade. Thank you for that.
Thanks, René. Thanks. I'm sure a couple of you now think, what has this to do with cities? What is this element? What are we talking about? I'm trying now to, let's say, to address a couple of topics that we slowly come to what does this development all mean. And of course it starts with, if there's a relevance between grid, production, cities, then you need cars. It doesn't make any sense to have all these, let's say, discussions if you're talking about 100,000 cars. So it's more in what is our vision into the future, how many cars will we have? How many batteries with wheels will we have? And I would like to have your, let's say, your educated guess. If I read the papers, I still see until now, until the elections here in Germany, that the German government expects that we will have 7 to 10 million electrical cars in 2030. And we have 47 million cars in Germany, by the way. So we're talking about 15 to 20%. Would any one of you feel free to make a guess what the next government will set as a goal?
We already made a guess, an educated guess, because we were asking in so-called clean room talks the OEMs what their expectations would be, and the result is that that the number is already considerably higher than 10 million. In 2030, it's 14 million, with roughly 10 million BEVs and roughly 4 million plug-in hybrids. So, and we already see right now that it's really ramping up. So you were talking, I think, about the hockey key. I think it's not yet the hockey key, but if you look at the numbers we have in Germany, for example, in August, electric vehicles had the biggest market share of all, and it's quickly ramping up. So this makes the question of the charging infrastructure even puts pressure.
More pressing.
Because if we don't want to stop this development, we have to follow the acceleration that we already see now in the selling of electric vehicles.
Yeah. So Fabian, could you imagine that in Germany there will be cities in 2030 that are only accessible for hydrogen or electrical cars? Like Oslo, like Amsterdam, like...
I think absolutely, but let me just sort of agree with Kurt that, we see an acceleration by a factor 2, and sort of what was true for 2030 will now happen 2025. And I find it quite impressive how the German OEMs, how they switched their models. And there's no doubt that all these companies are highly determined to completely change business models. I own myself a German electric car, and the quality of these cars is just amazing. So for me, it's without a doubt that we will see an accelerated development. Absolutely, I can imagine that cities will drive decarbonization relatively harder than other parts of the country. Perhaps I can later on share a little bit about the experience in Hamburg, because Hamburg is a city that is really, really determined to decarbonize very early on. And there are many ways for companies like ours to help them do that.
Yeah. René, if we have a lot of cars, and we're now talking about a city, and you would have a situation which is just described, or at least it's not impossible, that 100% of the cars in a city are electrical or maybe hydrogen. If you then talk about the system, then I assume that you also expect then that these cars are connected to the system. What's your...
Yeah, they have to be connected. And regarding the numbers, I really don't care. We know these numbers are going to increase rapidly, and we better start now creating the solutions. Otherwise, we will be too late, that's for sure, because this will explode. But indeed, in cities, we will face congestions, and that means we have to have solutions for that. And continuing to build infrastructure, from my perspective, is not a solution. Not on the country level, but not on the city level. It will be too expensive, it will be too slow. So the way to address is to find market mechanisms where people have financial incentives to charge, to stop charge, or to even feed energy back into the system when needed. And in my opinion, the cost for the commodity itself, for the energy, will reduce. But the cost for the flexibility, to have the energy at the right moment in time, access to power, that will increase. So we need financial systems, financial solutions to provide incentives to the consumers to charge and to not charge when needed.
Yeah, but that brings also to the conclusion that if you talk about millions of cars, so we are in Berlin here, so we've got 1.2 million cars, I believe. Yeah. And if these cars are all electrical, or with the goals of the government, let's say 1/3 of them is electrical, we're talking about 400,000 electrical cars in the city, then these cars all need to be connected to the system. Otherwise, they will not work.
But we have all the households connected to the system today, so it's of course it's additional elements, and there will also, as we mentioned earlier, a combination of fast charging and slow charging. Fast charging cannot really help us in managing the energy system, because if you come to fast charge your car, you are not inclined to say, okay, I'll provide energy back to the system. So for this energy management and these financial incentives, we should really look at the slow charging solutions, which is often in offices and people at their houses.
Yeah, I always like to talk about convenient charging and not slow charging. But anyway, it's the same what you mean. Yes. We're getting questions from you in the meantime here on our screen, I try to talk and read at the same time. One of the questions that is coming in now, and let's get you in and ask more questions through our system, is actually, addressing this. If the scale is really big, personally I think it will be extremely bigger than we assume at this very moment, at a moment that is very soon to us, so not 10 years. Where is the capital to pay for this? Who's going to pay for this if we have this huge infrastructure? Kurt, it's maybe something for you to address first.
Yeah, this is probably you need a definition first. The way the question is posed, you could get the impression that the anticipation is that charging infrastructure is a public good. In Germany, we call it Daseinsvorsorge, and I'm convinced that this is not the case. So what we are doing, or what the government is doing right now, really taking a lot of money in their hands to develop an initial network of charging infrastructure in Germany. But when it comes to later years, of course, this should be private. There should be business models behind it. So I think it's not the task of the state to provide a charging infrastructure. We can, and this is what we are doing right now. I think our funding programs add up to, I think, 4 or 5 billion euros, which is quite a lot of money. And this should be enough to establish an initial network, especially when it comes to the fast charging network all around the country. But then it has to be, there have to be private business models. It has to be the industry that builds the infrastructure. This would be my answer to this question.
So you see it as a task, let's say, from a government to organize that infrastructure will be built,
yes,
but not at the end a task to finance it.
In the end, not. At the beginning, yes, because we are at the very beginning of a huge transition, and I think this is good policy or economics policy if you now take the initial steps and even put capital in it. This is taxpayers' money we are using for building an initial set of charging infrastructure. But this can't go on forever, of course.
Yeah. And how long could that go on, in your view?
That's a good question. We are now...
to make it a bit more concrete, maybe talking about cities, you can roughly say in Europe that 50 to 60% of the people living in a city, so highly dense areas, are dependent on public charging. So they don't have an own driveway and need an infrastructure, otherwise they can't drive a car.
Yeah, but even this public charging should be in private hands in the end. So again, we have funding programs for every charging scenario there is, for charging at home, charging in the street, charging at work. We are putting 2 billion euros now into the so-called Deutschlandnetz, which will start rather soon. And then this has to develop into a private charging infrastructure where there are business models and industry behind it.
Yeah. Fabian, could you imagine that companies like Shell, or maybe even Shell, would invest in infrastructure like this?
Look, totally and absolutely, and I also completely agree that it's not the state's job to put a huge amount of capital into this energy transition. What is more relevant than the state investing itself is to have the right regulatory framework. And if the regulatory framework is clear, if it's reliable, if it gives investment certainty, then people like Shell and our competitors will be absolutely prepared to invest. If I talk about Shell, our previous business model was to invest in upstream oil and gas production, but with our new net zero emission strategy, the strategy is to invest in energy transition. So absolutely. That said, we will need targeted state investment in new emerging markets where you might have to incubate. In many ways, I think hydrogen is a bit of a case in point where some selected state investment might absolutely right. But for large parts, eMobility, to my mind, is a matter of private investments, and the state should really set the right regulatory framework.
Yeah. It's not totally the same topic, but there are questions coming in, and I can only read one after one because the same question is on all the three screens. Maybe you could pick that up as well, Fabian, before we move on to another topic. And actually the question here is if you are going to electrify all current Shell gas stations?
Yeah, it's a sexy and attractive question, and it invites a binary answer. But I mean, there's no binary answer to this. You heard me say we are committed to play a leading role in the electrification of transportation in Germany. We have a network of around about 2,000 gas stations as we speak. So the key determinant factor here is the customer. And we will, of course, bring the right charging equipment to those current gas stations where the customer will want it. We will want to do this at pace, but it's again the customer who determines the speed of which. Those people that like numbers, they might have researched some of the current utilization rates of charging equipment, and you see some very, very low numbers, which exactly is the issue. If you put a few €100,000 of capex into a nice gas station and no customer shows up, that's a bit of a problem. So of course I would like to say yes, 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 immediately everywhere, but that's simply not the reality. And we will do this in a measured way, in a calm way. But again, the piece is not per se our gas stations. We painted the picture of it's a much bigger ecosystem, and the total system will have to be played. That's very important.
Yeah, that's of course in the beginning market an issue. How is it used? How often is it used? If you look at certain front-runner countries, you see the data already coming in, how much it's used, and that is something we have to consider. Before we go to the next question here, you can have a look at it, Fabian, because the word Shell is in it. René, looking at the system and how big this flexibility is, I think that a lot of people do not yet have, let's say, an idea what we actually are talking about. To start it, I know that the redispatch don't know the latest number, but I recall from 2 years ago that the redispatch in Germany, only Germany, was 2 billion in a year. That actually means, in normal words, 2 billion of subsidized electricity. So it's not the subsidy, but subsidized electricity is not used. It's actually not used or thrown away, and is produced somewhere else in a not green way. How big will this be, and will it be so big that you could, if you look into a city with the bottlenecks that we will see in the grids, that you could imagine that you could even earn money with your car during the night?
Yes, that's the whole idea. When I started the speech, like 8 billion euro across Europe for balancing purposes. And this is to make sure that demand equals supply. On top of that, there's congestion management and redispatch, both on a national level, for instance, the constraints from North Germany to South Germany, but also in the cities. So the need for flexibility will increase. So if you would only look at the demand side, of course the cost will go higher. But I would also expect, if we connect indeed all these electric vehicles, home batteries and systems, that the supply will increase. So what the price level, normally being set by demand and supply, what that will be in 5 years, that's up to the market to decide.
Yeah, yeah. So it will be an extremely big market.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
It already is, and it will only grow. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we pick up another question here, and Fabian has read it. I've read it too. And maybe I changed my mind now, Fabian. It's better that I answer that question, not you. Would you agree?
Give it a go.
Yeah? Okay.
Thank you. I'm still thinking.
You're still thinking. Well, actually, the question is here is that wouldn't it be better for Shell to operate other brands than Shell, because the name of Shell, well, let me translate it, is connected to fossils, and this image is difficult to change. And that's why I thought, well, I know what the answer is, Fabian is, but I'm leading a non-integrated company within Shell, and therefore maybe I have a bit more distance. Well, this issue is of course true, but I know now, since I belong 6 months to Shell, that Shell wants to have this different position and is really changing and is not a fossil company in the future. And therefore it is logical and inevitable that Shell operates with this brand in this way. Because this is not something about today, this is something about in 5 and in 10 years, and the company is dedicated to do so. So I would answer it like that, but Fabian, please fill in if you want to add something.
Yeah, thank you. You helped. You helped. I mean, quite frankly, this transformation I described is huge. It's a big one, and it sounded like a technical challenge to kind of refabricate value chains, to invest in different power systems, etc. And technically, it is very challenging. But I think the much bigger challenge for a company like Shell is to change its DNA and to become fundamentally a more outside-in company, to listen more to your customer, to be way more collaborative, to be way more empathetic, to be way more humble. And I think these are the attributes we will need a huge amount of to really reinvent this company. And I personally believe the DNA is such that, yes, we can do it. And if we can do that, then I think we can also fill the Shell brand with these new attributes. So I believe in its doability, and I passionately work very hard for this. Is this, at the end of the day, going to work? I mean, we heard before, we don't have perfect plans, and there is no sort of pre-cooked recipe we all know will work, and I think the same is true for Shell's transformation. So I would have a quite humble approach to addressing this very question at the end.
Yeah, well, thank you for that open answer. Well, one of you, names are not mentioned, who was asking it, which is maybe a pity, but one of you is asking why don't we harmonize municipalities' approach to charging infrastructure? Well, could maybe you start and I will fill in, or maybe one of the others that...
Yes. First answer would be that you can't and should not harmonize everything, because what I said in my statement, it always depends on the situation, on the regional situation. We already discussed, for example, that if you live in the north of Germany, it would be sensible to charge by night, because then you have low demand and you have the electricity produced by offshore wind parks, and then there is an incentive in an integrated system to charge by night. Whereas in the south of Germany, you don't have, as we all know, until now, the wind energy from the north available. So, but on the other hand, they have much solar power there. So charging should be in daytime predominantly. So what I want to say is that there is no unique approach for everything. But what we could harmonize, and this is what we are working at, is to provide know-how for the municipalities to get things going. As, for example, know-how how to work with tenders, how to provide spaces. What I said in my statement, we need caretakers on the municipal level, and this is what we are working at in the Leitstelle, to provide the necessary know-how. But again, first step is that the municipalities provide human resources for this task, and this is not sufficiently the case right now.
And do you have any plans to help municipalities there actively? I don't mean sending out people, but
yeah, we are developing with a lot of money a digital platform, a know-how platform, especially designed for municipalities to get the know-how they need. This is what we are doing.
And do municipalities make money free to actually hire people and organize these tenders into the future?
Again?
do municipalities, as far as you know, make money available to get these people? So not only the know-how, but you need money as well, of course. They do.
Not yet, because there is a lack of understanding, I think, still, especially at the local level, of how big this transformation really is and how much care you need to take to speed things up.
Yeah.
This is something we have to work on all together.
Yeah, I think so too. Maybe Fabian, you have a view on that as well, but maybe as in between. If the assumption is true, and I think it's true, that every battery that has wheels needs to be connected to the system, it actually means that you need more sockets than cars. So if you have 15 million cars, you need 15 million sockets at least, at home, at work, or in public. And then you come to much bigger amounts of sockets that you actually need. Sure, we will do fast charging now and then, if it's needed, or if you live around the corner of a supermarket where is one. But a lot of people, of course, in the future would like to have this charging in a very convenient way. It has to be easy for our customers. So it has to be in front of your door if you don't have an own garage. Yeah. And the system, which René describes, wants to have access to this battery. So that means that it has to be connected.
Yeah.
And that means that you could say that if we are talking now in cities that plan a couple of 100 charge points, that it is
it's not enough. I absolutely agree.
Not enough.
I think the integration in the system is inevitable. But the question here was, is there one size fits all solution for all municipalities? And I don't think it is. It depends on the local situation, and we need a lot of charging points, and we need low charging points for the integration in the system. But let me add one aspect. What I think we were discussing it before we entered the stage, and you were very optimistic, as you said, regulation follows innovation. I hope. I really sincerely hope that this is the case. But right now, regulation lags far behind, because regulation has to enable the market incentives you were talking about, and we are not there yet.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, and I also agree that what I now said was not the question, but I took the opportunity to address that topic and come to an answer. That's actually. Well, we go on. Might the 44-cent price limit hinder further private development in DC fast charging and push public AC charging in cities? Fabian.
Yes. Yeah,
I beg to disagree.
Okay, then you go first. But we find the 44-cent piece a bit of a hindrance to fast rollout of fast charging. I think that's evident, and we are also engaging with the various authorities to address this very matter. It's again sort of this piece around states. Please set regulation, a clear framework, but don't be too involved in price setting and these type of things. The market is there to regulate these type of things. I don't have too much of a perspective on DC versus AC, and
this is,
Kurt, you might be better placed to speak to that.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so this comes out of the discussion of the Deutschlandnetz, the fast charging net approach. And first thing is that we might have had a communication problem with this. There is no 44-cent price limit. We called it in German eine atmende Preisgrenze. I really can't translate this into English. I don't know what it would mean. But the thing is that, of course, it could go up if, for example, electricity prices rise and you have more to pay for the electricity. The limit will go up. Of course, it could go down too. But the thinking behind this is, first, it's a business-to-business price. It's not the business-to-customer B2C price. And then the approach was to the perspective of the customer. As you always say, convenience is king. And we wanted to make, or what we want to achieve, is to make a Tocladen. I don't know this in English too. So
Me neither.
you can charge wherever you come. You can charge without having a card or anything. That this has to be convenient, and from a customer perspective, attractive. And this is what because we give a lot of money in the system, and this is what we want to have, what we set as a precondition. Yeah. First thing, and then second, I don't think that there is too much interaction between the question for AC charging in cities. The Deutschlandnetz aims at fast charging in all over the country, and especially it goes there where right now there is no fast charging. This is a precondition too. We were looking where are fast charging points, and there were not with our predictions for traffic. Where not enough fast charging points. This is where we want to add with some with the Deutschlandnetz. So I think we have to communicate this a little bit better. And I think the more we explain it, the better it gets. I hope so.
But for me, this is only one piece of the regulatory framework that we need, and there's quite some perverse incentives currently in the system for people, for cars to provide services to the energy landscape. Take double taxation. If your energy users become more because you deliver back in your system and you provide system service, if you're not careful, you pay higher taxes, double taxation. You pay higher grid fees. And so these are really perverse incentives that are not helpful. We are lobbying to change some of them. Successfully in the Netherlands, you see double taxation is skipped, and it's also on the agenda in Brussels. But specifically in Germany, you have cost-based redispatch. This congestion from north to south. The cost that the TSOs can incur is based on the cost that the big power plants are making. It's tailor-made cost design for them. But we don't need that. We need that cost basis to also relate to electric vehicles and home batteries. And these are some regulatory changes that we urgently need to make it more attractive for consumers to become those prosumers that we want them to become.
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe from my side, although I'm the moderator, I also truly believe that if you look at the market, and at this moment you're talking about an 8 billion market in Europe of redispatch. So just imagine the amount, and this only will be bigger and bigger, because the congestion will not only be at TSO level, it will also be on DNO level. Yeah. And that means and we cannot build the grids for the peak demand of charging electrical cars. So we will have to do it. You're also right, we will have to change the regulation. Yeah. There's no other way. And the interesting part of this, of course, is that in the end, it's good for the consumer. Because the consumer will be able to charge at the moment when it is not only convenient, because you sleep or you work, but it's also the cheapest moment. Yeah. And that's why this is so interesting.
Okay, the 8 billion that we talk is now only accessible by the big industry. And the idea is that we repurpose this value pool to the consumers through aggregation. Yeah. That's the opportunity for all of us here.
We have to come slowly to an end, although there are questions coming in. I see on the clock that we have 2 minutes. And I would like to give you the opportunity before I say thank you. What do you think is today the biggest hurdle for this infrastructure in the city? What should we solve today?
Human resources and space.
Human resources.
And space.
Yeah. And Fabian?
No, I spoke just the other day with a mayor of a prominent city in Germany, and we talked about permits. And in this particular place, there's 1.4 FTEs working as sort of critical part of permits. Huh? And I think it sort of visibly underlines the human resource issue, that all these tasks are doable, but everyone needs to put their mind to it. Huh? Yeah. I think that's what needs to happen. So it might be sense of urgency or sense of resolve, something like that.
René?
I fully agree with that sense of urgency. The technology is there. We have implemented. It's now a political willingness for people to work together to make it happen. particularly the DSOs, the DNOs, with the TSOs to make sure that we have one integrated system that consumers can tap into.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Maybe a last few words, especially I recognize that people, not only capital, but people is extremely important, knowledge. Well, before I say a word about that, first of all, thank you. Honored that you are here from this different angle. And although maybe you at the beginning thought what has it to do with cities, it became obvious, I think. Conclusion for me is also that not only I, but also you think that we are at a hockey stick development and it goes extremely fast. And we will have much more cars than we think. It will be much more integrated. There's a lot of money involved as well. Now I want to thank you for that. I want to thank Christian Hahn. I don't know if he's here for organizing this conference. Like last year, I think it's a big success in this format that we have here. And meeting people actually is extremely good. And the last thing I would like to say to you all, we all need people. I need people as well. Feel free to address me, lex.hartman@ubitricity.com. I have 100 vacancies. You're welcome. Thank you all.